7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Challenger. Good roll program confirmed. Challenger now heading downrange.
Tom, everything looks normal to this point?
It's about 20 seconds.
Everything looks normal to this point. It's when the long-range tracking cameras took over, and you could see an extreme close-up as the solid rocket boosters appeared to be breaking away from the shuttle and then explode. It comes up in just a few seconds here.
Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles. Downrange distance 3 nautical miles.
It occurred at 9 miles into the mission downrange.
Engines throttling up. 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
There.
You could see right before the explosion at the external tank where it attaches to the shuttle, a flame appeared to break out between the external tank and the shuttle.
Tom, it was just a situation where everything looked fine, and then all of a sudden it looked like a giant fireworks display overhead. The weather and the sky being so clear, you could of course see it for miles and miles. And at first, no one was quite sure what we had seen. Everyone was just sort of standing around as if things were going normally. But of course, when I saw that fireworks, sort of a fireworks display, I said, "This is not right. It's not something that I had ever seen before." And at that point, I began questioning what had happened, as we all did. But here now at the Kennedy Space Center, everybody's just stunned. They're in shock. It's a situation where people are just sort of standing around in just bewilderment at this point.
John, we understand that a C-130 aircraft and several ships are now headed to that point about 9 miles downrange.
And this was the scene as the spectators there, including some relatives of the crew on the spacecraft, watched the actual moment of explosion.
The picture you were just seeing was Christy McCullough's parents watching in horror. These are the students from her school. Many of them probably had their view blocked just as we did with the television cameras, with just a huge fireball and a huge cloud of smoke. They may not realize yet what has happened. You see concern etched on their faces. The breath that they've been holding released. And then the realization sets in that something is wrong.
And within minutes, this reaction from the White House.
Shocked at what he has just seen replayed on television concerning the shuttle launch. We do not have any more information than is being provided to the public at this time. The way the Federal President found out about it is he was in the Oval Office with a group of senior staff preparing for some questions with a group of network correspondents and anchors that were having lunch in the White House today regarding the budget and the State of the Union. The Vice President and the Foreign Policy Advisor, John Poindexter, came in with others and informed the President that the news had just broken. We immediately adjourned our Oval Office meeting and went into an adjoining room, the President's study, where there's a television, and the President then began to review television reports of the explosion there shortly after the launch. So once again, the President is concerned, he is saddened, He is very anxious to have more information on it. At the moment, as I say, we're learning most of our information from what the public is getting.
What is your best Well, and here we have the Challenger, the 10th flight for Challenger in the most beautiful weather, with a huge crowd of spectators and some of the relatives of the flight crew watching as the 7-strong flight crew took Challenger up in the first 60 seconds of what they called nominal flight. Quite correct, everything worked fine. There's the shuttle itself facing us with a huge red external tank full of fuel in the middle and the 2 solid rocket boosters, the small thin tubes at the side, which are pushing it up the first minute or so of flight. Now I'm going to bring Tim Furness in just to watch this moment when the explosion takes place. We'll play it back again, just once again, in a moment in slow motion. But here we are about 50 seconds into the flight now, but just at the moment before the solid rocket boosters, Tim Furness.
At this point, the engines are being throttled back up again. They had previously been throttled down, and the engines were throttled back up again, and the explosion occurred soon after that. But it didn't seem as though there was any problem with the main engines of the shuttle themselves, but possibly a fuel leakage of some kind from a fuel line on the external tank, which was made worse by possibly a malfunction of the solid rocket booster, which is on the left-hand side. It didn't seem as though it was firing correctly to start with.
Now we're in slow motion, Tim, if you can just take us through it.
The solid rocket booster on the left-hand side doesn't look as though it's firing very cleanly. And it could be that there was a malfunction in that, which perhaps ruptured the external tank, or there was a leakage of fuel around the external tank, which was ignited by the solid rocket booster. The problem here, you'll see the explosion in a second, the main explosion happens in almost the centre of the external tank, underneath the belly of the shuttle, just there. And that is where there is a fuel line down into the main engines of the shuttle. Now, the problem is that people have suggested, I've heard on the American television, that the solid rocket boosters, or the solid rocket booster on the left-hand side, was at fault. But if you continue looking at this film, you'll see that both solid rocket boosters appear to be continue to fire, the one on the right-hand side and the one on the left. The one on the right-hand side you should see in a minute firing away. And a little bit later on, there's a
there it is now, coming out on the right-hand side.
And that seems to be perfectly all right. The one on the left, which people say might have malfunctioned, seemed to me to be firing all right afterwards. And they seem to be going off at different angles and firing perfectly all right. So it could be a partial solid rocket booster fault which ruptured the fuel tank, or perhaps a rupture in the fuel line down into the main engines. But I don't think there was a problem with the main engines themselves.
Now, Tim, is there any way anybody could have survived that horrific fireball there?
Well, that tank is just one great big pack of dynamite, and there is just no way anybody could survive that. It just would have broken up the whole vehicle.
Tim Furness, and there they are, the 7 of them, and there are 2 women in the crew. And
that's Dick Scobie, who's the commander of the 51L mission. It was his second flight. Judy Resnick was the second American woman in space. This was also her second flight, and she was flying as a mission specialist.
She was single, I think.
That's she was a divorcee. Sharon McAuliffe, the first citizen in space, the US teacher. Ellison Onizuka, a mission specialist flying his second mission. Greg Jarvis, a payload specialist, a passenger on the shuttle flying for Hughes Aircraft Company. Ron McNair, who flew on the space shuttle flight that featured the first manned manoeuvring unit, and Mike Smith, the shuttle pilot, who was a rookie. The rookies, in fact, the people who were going to be flying to space for the first time, were to be the 200th people in space.